Who are you when no one is watching? Who are you when your job title is removed? Who are you when your opinions no longer feel like your own? Who are you when your likes, beliefs, routines, and goals were quietly copied from everyone around you? And if everything that makes you you can be taken away so easily, did you ever truly have an identity in the first place? Most people never ask these questions. Not because they are unimportant, but because asking them is uncomfortable. Identity feels solid. It feels permanent. We assume it belongs to us in the same way our name or face does. But psychology tells a very different story. Identity is not something we are born with. It is something that forms slowly, silently, and often without our awareness. From the moment we enter the world, we begin adapting. We learn which behaviors are rewarded and which are rejected. We notice which opinions are praised and which ones create tension. Over time, we adjust ourselves to fit. This process is not evil. It is not even intentional. It is how the human brain survives. Belonging has always meant safety. Isolation has always meant danger. Because of this, the brain learns to prioritize acceptance over authenticity. It copies what works. It repeats what is approved. Slowly, a version of the self forms, but that version is shaped more by the environment than by conscious choice. This is why identity feels stable while still being fragile. It exists, but it depends on external reinforcement to remain intact. When that reinforcement disappears, identity begins to weaken. A person retires and suddenly feels lost. A relationship ends and the sense of self collapses. Social approval changes and beliefs quietly shift to match the new norm. None of this feels dramatic in the moment. It feels like confusion, like emptiness, like not recognizing yourself anymore. Psychologically, this is not a breakdown, it is exposure. It is the moment when the mind realizes how much of the self was borrowed. Identity does not vanish suddenly. It fades when it no longer serves its social function. And for many people, that moment never comes because they remain inside systems that continuously define who they are. This is why identity disappearance feels rare, but is actually common. It happens whenever the external structure that held the self together is removed. And when it happens, the brain reacts with anxiety, numbness, or quiet panic. Not because something is wrong, but because something familiar is gone. Understanding this changes how we see ourselves. Identity is not a core. It is a construction. And like all constructions, it can weaken, shift, or collapse under the right conditions. To understand what happens when identity disappears, we need to understand how identity forms in the first place. Psychologically, identity is a collection of patterns. These patterns include beliefs, habits, roles, emotional responses, and self-descriptions. None of them exist in isolation. They are shaped by repetition and feedback. The brain is highly sensitive to social signals. It constantly monitors approval, rejection, and status. When a behavior leads to acceptance, the brain marks it as safe. When a belief leads to conflict, the brain softens or hides it. Over time, this process becomes automatic. We stop noticing the adjustments. They feel natural. They feel like us. This is why people often confuse comfort with authenticity. If a behavior feels easy and familiar, it is assumed to be genuine. But familiarity does not mean truth. It means repetition. Identity feels real because it has been rehearsed thousands of times in the same environment. Problems begin when the environment changes. A move to a new culture, a change in social group, a loss of role or status. Suddenly, the behaviors that once worked no longer produce the same response. The feedback loop breaks. The brain loses its reference points. When this happens, people often experience a strange emptiness. They may say they feel disconnected, unmotivated, or unclear about who they are. This is not because identity is gone, but because the brain is waiting for new signals to rebuild it. The self becomes flexible again, which feels threatening when structure is expected. In extreme cases, people cling harder to borrowed identities. They adopt rigid ideologies. They define themselves through opposition. They merge with groups that offer strong narratives. This restores certainty, but at a cost. The identity becomes narrower and more defensive. Psychology calls this identity foreclosure. It occurs when the self stops exploring and locks onto a fixed definition to avoid discomfort. This is why identity loss can lead to extremism, burnout, or emotional shutdown. The mind prefers a false self over no self at all. But identity disappearance is not always destructive. In controlled conditions, it can be transformative. When external pressure is removed and the brain is allowed to observe itself without judgment, a more conscious identity can form, one based on values rather than imitation. This process is slow and often uncomfortable. It requires tolerating uncertainty. It requires resisting the urge to immediately replace the old self with a new label. Most people avoid this stage, not because they are weak, but because society rarely rewards identity ambiguity. A critical question emerges at this point. If identity is so easily shaped by environment, how much of what we believe about ourselves is actually chosen? This question challenges a core assumption of modern culture, which is that identity is personal, fixed, and self-generated. Research in social psychology shows that behavior often comes before belief. People act first, then adjust their self-concept to match their actions. This creates the illusion of internal consistency. The mind prefers coherence, even if it has to rewrite the story to achieve it. When identity disappears, this story collapses. The narrative loses its structure. People may feel like observers of their own thoughts rather than authors. This experience can feel unsettling, but it also reveals something important. The self is not a single entity. It is a process. This realization can reduce shame. Many people blame themselves for feeling lost. They assume something is wrong with them. In reality, the mind is doing exactly what it was designed to do. It is recalibrating in the absence of external direction. The danger lies in rushing this process. When identity disappears, there is a temptation to quickly adopt new roles, beliefs, or labels. This restores comfort, but prevents awareness. The mind moves from one borrowed identity to another without noticing the pattern. What would happen if we allowed the discomfort to remain? If we observed the emptiness without filling it immediately? This is where psychological growth becomes possible. Not by finding a new identity, but by understanding how identity forms at all. Few people reach this stage. It requires patience and introspection. It requires separating awareness from self-definition. It requires accepting that not knowing who you are is not a failure, but a transition. Most systems do not support this. Workplaces, social groups, and online platforms reward clarity and certainty. Ambiguity is treated as weakness. As a result, identity disappearance is often hidden or avoided. Yet those who experience it consciously often report increased psychological flexibility. They become less reactive, less dependent on validation, more aware of internal values rather than external expectations. So the question becomes not whether identity will change, but whether we will notice it changing. When identity disappears, something subtle happens. The noise quiets. The constant need to defend, perform, or compare weakens. This does not feel like happiness. It feels like neutrality, like space. Many people misinterpret this as emptiness, but psychologically it is openness. From this state, identity can be rebuilt more deliberately. Not around roles or approval, but around values, boundaries, and conscious choice. This does not mean rejecting society. It means interacting with it without losing awareness of its influence. Identity, when seen clearly, becomes lighter, less rigid, less fragile. It no longer needs to be constantly reinforced. It becomes adaptable rather than defensive. This does not happen quickly. It is not dramatic. It is quiet. It shows up in small decisions. In noticing when a belief is adopted for comfort rather than truth. In recognizing when silence is chosen over performance. Most people will never fully experience identity disappearance, and that is not a problem. But understanding that identity is not permanent can reduce fear when change happens. It can make loss less disorienting. It can turn confusion into curiosity. The goal is not to eliminate identity, but to relate to it differently. To see it as something that can evolve rather than something that must be protected at all costs. So if you ever feel disconnected from who you thought you were, it may not mean you are losing yourself. It may mean you are finally seeing how the self works. If this idea made you reflect on your own experiences, you are not alone. Many people quietly feel this shift but rarely talk about it. You are welcome to share your thoughts or observations in the comments. And if you want to explore more psychology behind identity, behavior, and the human mind, you can subscribe to the channel for future discussions.